This is the Content Marketing Podcast, episode number 111, highlights from the Content Writers Bootcamp. Hello and welcome to the Content Marketing Podcast. This is the show where we help you attract and retain business through the power of quality content. I'm your host, Rachel Parker of Resonance Content Marketing, and today is February 26th, 2015. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for episode number 111 of the Content Marketing Podcast. Just a reminder, we are live on iTunes and on Stitcher, so if you're listening to this episode on the blog, you can click on over and subscribe. That means you'll get new episodes automatically delivered to your listening device of choice. And if you use a different app for your podcast listening pleasure, we also have an RSS feed, and I will provide that link in the blog post for this episode. The month of February, as it draws to a close, has been our month-long Content Writers Bootcamp here at Resonance. And in last week's episode of the podcast, I shared my own process for writing content. If you happen to miss that episode, feel free to click on over to iTunes or to Stitcher or to the RSS feed and get all caught up. Before I move on to this week's topic and on to our news feed, I do want to mention a couple of news items from here at Resonance. Number one, our content marketing podcast has recently topped 50,000 downloads in the 2 years that we have been here on the air. So I want to say thank you to everyone who has been following us over the years and who has contributed to that milestone. Also want to give a shout out to our friends at Nectify. They put together a list of what they call the best marketing podcast, and they included the Content Marketing Podcast as part of that bunch. So we're extremely honored. We're in very good company along with our friends Joe Polizzi and some other folks from the content marketing world, and we are honored to be on that list. Okay, on to this week's topic. This week, I'm going to share some highlights from our monthly VIP webinar, which this month was a Content Writers Bootcamp. But first, it's time to check in with our news feed for this week's rundown of news you can use. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Facebook has certainly been keeping their advertising team busy. We talked about one update last week, and this week they have announced product ads. And the way those work is that marketers can upload their entire product catalogs and create campaigns targeting certain products to specific audiences. Or they can let Facebook automatically deliver the most relevant products to people. So if you are in the product business, what you can do is just upload your entire catalog and create a Facebook campaign, and Facebook can automatically feed those ads to people who are in the relevant target audience. So actually a pretty cool feature. Also some news from Twitter this week. Twitter has introduced TweetDeck Teams. If you're not familiar with TweetDeck, it is it's a social media managing tool, and what Twitter has done is they've created an easy way to share access to your Twitter account without actually sharing your password. So what you can do is, if you use TweetDeck, you can delegate access to as many people as you like and just remove them when they no longer need access, and they never have to have your password. And I thought this was extremely intelligent, because this issue actually comes up more often than you think. For example, one of my clients, they have a medium-sized company, and there are many people in the company who have had access to the Twitter password, who have, I need to, promote this trade show, or I've got this campaign going on, give me the Twitter password. Well, a couple of weeks ago, there was a rogue tweet that went out that contained some faulty information, and not sure who posted it. It was just out there on Twitter from this company's Twitter account, and they had no idea who sent it. So with a tool like this, what you can do is grant access to people. Like if someone needs to tweet from a trade show, you can give them access during the trade show and then revoke it afterwards, so that you can still keep control over who has that Twitter password. So A very, very good update from our friends at Twitter. Okay, our content hit of the week had to do with a topic that is close to my heart. The title of the post is How Follow Your NOLA Used Content Marketing to Put New Orleans Back on the Map. And this is a post from the Business to Community blog. And this really hit home with me because New Orleans is my hometown. Don't know if I've shared that on this podcast or not, but it is. And this blog post goes into how the New Orleans Tourist Commission used a hashtag-powered campaign to really help the city revive its tourist business after Hurricane Katrina. It's a terrific comeback story, and it just happens to be powered by content marketing, so I think you'll really enjoy it. And I will put the link in the blog post for today's episode. Okay, that's it for this week's news update. If you stumble across something you think might be of interest to your fellow content marketers, please shoot it on over to us so that we can share. Now it's time for this week's Spotlight segment, highlights from the Content Writers Bootcamp. One thing we do here at Resonance that our audiences really enjoy, and that's a heck of a lot of fun for us, is once a month we produce a VIP webinar. And these webinars are open to anyone who would like to register. And we spend 1 hour taking a real deep dive into one aspect of content marketing. So this month, it was all about writers, all about content writers and sharing advice for them and sharing tips. And so our webinar this month was called the Content Writers Bootcamp. And we just went into some high-level strategies that content writers are going to find very useful as they approach their work day in and day out. As an aside, so as I'm recording this, we just wrapped up the webinar a couple of hours ago, and we're going to have that replay available online. So if you would like to have access to that video replay, just hit me up on Twitter or shoot me an email and just let me know. I'd be happy to send that link to you. But for right now, I'm going to be sharing some of the highlights from that webinar. So we started our conversation talking about the reader. Now, if you hang around this podcast a lot, or if you read my blog post, or if you hang around me, you will know that I am absolutely obsessive with advising people to know your audience, know exactly who your content is talking to, what that person looks like, and what's going on with them. What are their pain points? What frustrates them? What are their hopes and dreams for the future, etc., etc. So we spent the first part of our webinar talking about who is your reader really. And so we talked about the things that you really need to know about this person. For one, the demographics. So age, gender, education level, profession, geographic location. But we also need to know psychographics. So what does this person value in life? What are their attitudes towards particular subjects? What's their level of expertise? For example, if you're writing about a technical subject, you need to know how much your audience or how much your reader already knows about it and what they need to fill in the gaps in their expertise. You also need to know what they expect from you. So, and this has to do with your brand. How does your reader perceive your brand? What kind of tone of voice do they expect from you? What kind of approach? Do they accept something that's very practical or something that's kind of more high level and introspective? All this is important as you go to create your content because it's really going to help you create a content product that is going to resonate with that reader and everything that he or she holds dear. And I shared a quick tip that a strategy that I find very useful, and that is to use what you know about your reader or your desired reader and create a persona. So create a made-up character who represents the main characteristics of your reader for this particular piece of content. What is their age? What is the gender? Where does this person work? Where do they live? Are they in the suburbs? Are they urban? What do they do for fun? What are their frustrations, etc., etc.? And give that person a name And also, what I find useful is go out on your stock photography websites and find a photo that reminds you of this person. And once you put together that persona, what I like to do is put it on the wall of my office right behind my monitor. So I shared a persona I created some time ago of a person named David. And I created this very elaborate persona about David, and then I put all that into a kind of a poster, kind of a flyer, and I put it on the wall of my office. And what that allows me to do is that as I go through and create content, I can look at that persona and say, okay, how does this resonate with David? What does this make sense to David? Would David find this interesting? Would David be bored by this? Is this stuff he already knows? Or would he be confused by it? Am I, 2 steps ahead of him? And that, to me, it takes this ephemeral reader who, doesn't really exist, and it really gives that reader flesh and blood and a heart and mind and opinions and hands and feet, and really personalizes, for me at least, the content creation experience. So that's what we had to say about sketching your reader. So once we have the reader in mind, the next thing we can do is start mapping the journey. So if you look at every piece of content, it really is a journey from point A to point B. The reader starts off with a certain level of knowledge, or a certain assumption, or a certain attitude, or a certain feeling. And then as the content writer, we decide what the finish line is going to look like. What is that reader going to know that she didn't know before? What new attitude might she have after taking this content? What new feeling might this person have after interacting with this content? So get really clear on what those starting and ending points look like. And then from there, we can create points along the way, content points or proof points. And for these points along the way, I compare it to an attorney making his or her case for a jury. If an attorney is defending someone in a criminal trial, you wouldn't just have the lawyer stand up and say, yeah, my client's innocent, defense rests, and then say nothing for the rest of the trial. No, he has to build a case. He has to bring forth evidence. He has to interview witnesses, and then hopefully at the end of the proceedings, win the jury around to his argument. Well, as writers, we have a very similar task ahead of us. We have the reader's starting point, and we have the vision of where we want to take them, and we need to guide them along a certain path to get them there so that they can draw their own conclusion, which happens to align with what we had in mind. And what we really need to do here is to be very mindful of where that reader is coming from, because, we don't want to start a piece with, you think, you hold this opinion? Well, that's wrong. And this is what's really the case. And I'm going to show you why. No, we really need to meet them where they are. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a minute. So that was the whole mapping the journey portion of the webinar, where we talked about taking that big picture look at where are they now, where do they need to go, and how do we help them get there. So from there, we move on to building your first draft. And this is where I pulled out a diagram that might look very familiar to you from your middle school composition classes. You might remember your teachers talking about the keyhole model. And it's a visual that looks like an old keyhole in an old house. So it starts very broad, and then it becomes narrow, and then it becomes broad again. And all that means is that as we put our ideas out there, as we formulate the points that make up this piece of content, we have to start very general. So, for example, to use an example from the world of journalism, if a journalist is covering the president's press conference about the state of the economy, she wouldn't start the article talking about what kind of tie he was wearing. Okay, she would start it with the general idea, setting the scene, setting the context, and then become more and more specific. And then at the end, when we come to our conclusion, then we broaden out again and become more general as we help the reader kind of make sense and put everything that we've talked about back into context and make it actionable, make it something that he or she can take action on. So looking a little bit more in detail in these three different areas of your content, the opening, the body, and the closer. If we look at the opener, and for our purposes, I'm going to include the headline in the opener because that is really the most important part of your piece. You have got to grab the reader's attention and let him or her know exactly what they're going to get when they read this piece of content. Your opener is where you address the question of so what? So what? Why should I spend the next 5, 10, 15 minutes of my time reading this content? What's in it for me? Why is it going to benefit me? And as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we really need to meet readers where